Hi everyone, may peace be on you all, and welcome to another episode of I'm a Muslim and That's Okay. I am back with another Gift of the Gab segment because, I can't stop talking and I love these discussions. And I have two very special guests with me. All my guests are special, but, I'm so happy that the both of you, agreed to join me because it's not that I haven't had therapists before in my show. I have. But both of you, Sadie Hernandez and Sobia Saleem, and a little preface about Sobia, they are my cousin. I mean, I've known them for a long time. But both of you are therapists in training. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves, the both of you, and what exactly is a therapist in training? I mean, I don't know.
Sadie, did you want to start or would you like me to go first?
Go ahead, take it away.
So my name is Sobia Saleem. I'm a queer Muslim. My pronouns are they/she. I'm a marriage and family therapist trainee in California who sees individuals, couples, and groups at the LGBTQ Center of Orange County. My passions include couples therapy, sex therapy, psilocybin assisted harm reduction therapy, and spiritual therapy, especially for the queer community and the Muslim community. And I work with Sadie, who is my colleague, and we promote mental health awareness on our Instagram, Sadie and Sobia Therapy.
Thank you so much, Sobia. You still haven't told us what's a therapy in training. I like, here's the thing. In my mind, it's like, is it a doctor in residency? I don't know. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah. So marriage and family therapy, there's multiple degrees in it. You can get a master's, you can get a doctorate in marriage and family therapy, you can get a PsyD in marriage and family therapy. Mm-hmm. And essentially there's a clinical component that you need to complete before graduation. And the Board of Behavioral Services, the BBS, assigns and kind of regulates how many hours you need to do before graduation. So as you're seeing clients before graduation, you're referred to as a trainee. Once you graduate, you apply for an associate number, mm-hmm. and then you're considered an associate before your licensure. And then you're a licensed LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist.
I see. now, I mean, again, I might not know the specifics of it, but again, I can see the steps now.
Yeah.
So please, Sadie, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so a lot of what Sobia said, because we're at the same program for school, we're at the same place for work. Just like Sobia, I'm a second year graduate student. We're graduating in December, hopefully moving into associateship after that. But we're both studying marriage and family therapy, both working at the LGBTQ Center in Orange County. I work similar to Sobia again with individuals, with couples, and the people that we see, for the most part, they come in to work with us because they want a therapist who is affirming of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. That doesn't necessarily mean they're coming in to talk about the fact that they're struggling with their sexual orientation or the fact that they're gay. It's just that they have issues finding a therapist elsewhere who is affirming.
Right.
And so that is what I do. And I've been there since January. Mm-hmm. So it's been great.
Right. And I think it's so great what the both of you do. But I think especially because it is something that is so poorly understood. As somebody who's cis heteronormative, we don't really understand when we come across the discussion or somebody who is from the LGBTQ plus community. Our brain freezes. Let's be honest. We don't know, we don't understand how to move forward with this. So I think it's amazing that the both of you work with the LGBTQ plus community. Apart from that, that you also do couples therapy, sex therapy is what you said. Isn't that correct, Sobia? I think it's amazing. But the reason why I had both of you here, it's because I wanted to have this discussion about the work both of you do with the LGBTQ plus community. I think if I had to start someplace, I think what is the one most common issue that the both of you see when you see individuals who are from the queer community that come to you?
Oof, that's a tough question. I recently did a presentation for my graduate program where I was talking about queer issues and couples therapy,
Right.
actually. And the chapter that I was reading for the presentation talked about, it sort of gave this like example in the beginning of the text and goes, what if you were asked to sort of sum up the problems that you would come across when you're seeing heterosexual couples, right?
Right.
Like, what is the number one problem you think you would see? And it basically was to point out that the way that we look at queer people, queer couples is really different than how we look at heterosexual people, because with heterosexual people, we realize, of course, they're not a monolith. There's so much intergroup diversity, right?
Right.
And so similar to heterosexual people, I think the same is true with queer people, which obviously I think everybody, here in this space like recognizes.
Right.
But I guess if I had to point out one of the commonalities that I see, I think it's a lot of struggling with a lack of acceptance from family and friends. And I think a lot of that sort of spills over into other issues in their life.
Right.
That can lead to things like depression, anxiety, or the lack of acceptance could have really compounded into some form of trauma, relational trauma, and all of that is sort of affecting their quality of life or their relationships.
Right. I mean, I can completely see that because again, somebody who is cis, straight, heteronormative, it's not something that we have been programmed to be exposed to. I'm really old. I'm not gonna be lying. I'm really old. Okay, basically a dinosaur. Especially in the environment I grew up in Pakistan, there was a certain expectation that you had to exist in a certain way. Black sheeps of any type were very rarely tolerated. Do you find that is still a problem, especially when that comes to the queer community? We are in 2021, but I mean, I don't know how far we've come.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends also on like who the person is that you're talking about. And so, if you're, and it depends from person to person, right? But like if I'm looking at a queer minor who's cis and white, there might be some room for diversity there because several other of their identities are like dominant positions. But if I'm looking at a trans woman of color, it's still kind of dangerous out there. Trans women of color have like really high homicide rates in the US. So yeah, it sort of depends a little bit.
I think the other thing I wanted to ask is that, yes, being a part of the queer community, it definitely comes with its risks. I think what I want to hear from the both of you is that what are the risks that queer, it doesn't matter, adult, youths, what are the risks that they face, whether they are white or whether they're from minority groups?
A lot of risks.
That's the reason I asked this question. People don't understand because they exist with such harsh biases that they don't exist, that they don't understand that it comes with so many risks. And I want the both of you to tell me, my audience, what those risks are.
Yeah, I mean, Sadie and I can both speak to some of the mental health risks that come with being queer, especially for queer youth. There's higher rates of depression, there's higher attempted suicides, there's higher rates of suicide, there's just higher levels of anxiety, and all of that, can be correlated to social acceptance or lack thereof, family acceptance, lack thereof, and just how existence is navigating these systems that are not designed for people who look like them, who love like them, who live like them,
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, like, both of you also work with LGBTQ plus youth who come from faith backgrounds. And I think that is another important discussion that seems to get glossed over, especially within the Muslim community. I can't speak for the Christian community because I'm not part of it. But there is a definite increased bias if you are queer and if you are Muslim. If the both of you could tell me, like, when you work with the youth who come from faith-based backgrounds, what are some of the problems that they come with? And answer that question for us, then we'll get to the second part.
I mean, I think what you find is a lot of people struggling, a lot of adolescents struggling to reconcile these beliefs that they were raised with and that they are constantly surrounded with.
Right.
And then reconciling who they are and knowing that who they are isn't going to be accepted. Right. And even more than that, might be ridiculed. They might be punished for it. They might be kicked out of their home for it. Right. Adolescents who are queer. I think I was reading the other day, I'm not even sure how this works out mathematically because I'm not good at math, but there's like 120% risk of homelessness for queer youth. So I think when we're even talking about the acceptance component for queer people, queer adolescents, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that religion, specifically Christianity in America, really pushes a certain kind of model of what should be, right? When we're talking about like the black sheep, I do think Christianity informs a lot of what conformity should look like. Right. And so we're really coming up against really powerful influences when we're working with queer adolescents.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially hard for the Muslim community and Muslim youth who are queer. There's a lot of ostracization, there's a lot of shunning, there's a lot of this, being put in the position where you have to supposedly choose. Right. There's not a lot of resources out there. There's things like the Queer Crescent, and there's various Instagram accounts that are accepting and kind of encompass and embrace queer Muslims, but it seems like you have to hide this portion of yourself, or just even being raised and socialized in these two different ways, right? Right. Where it almost feels like, okay, if I accept this part of my identity, I'm evil, but this is all I know. And so there's this huge sense of like existential dread, internal moral conflict, cognitive dissonance. And, the hope is that kind of resolves as time goes on, or is resolved. But for a lot of people, especially who are young, they're in the thick of it,
Right. And I think if I had to ask a question, is that if somebody comes from a faith-based background, either Christian, Muslim, or whichever faith-based background, they're definitely struggling. How do the both of you help with this? Because that's the thing, I can't perceive it, but I want to know, what is the kind of help that the both of you give, or anybody can give, that they can be okay?
Yeah, I definitely want to hear Sobia's thoughts on this, but the first thing that comes to my mind is, Sobia and I lead a group at the LGBTQ Center called Queering Faith, where we basically have clients from, whichever faith background come in and talk about reconciling those religious beliefs, their faith backgrounds with the queer experience. Right. And in my opinion, I think the fact that we get to set up a group like this is one of the biggest healing components. Right. Because they get to see that they're not alone in struggling with those maybe internalized homophobic beliefs. And I think not feeling alone is so powerful. Right. In therapy. And obviously when you're one-on-one therapy, you don't get that as much as when you're in group therapy. So the fact that we are able to provide that, I think, is a huge part of unpacking all of that traumatic stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Sadie said, community is so powerful, and it can be interfaith community as well, because a lot of what happens is for queer people of faith is they feel like they lose their community, especially faith-based communities. They're so tight and tightly knit that when you lose that, you feel like you lose your sense of who you are, your identity, where you belong.
Right.
And much of the queer community is not religious, not all of it. You know, there's obviously overlap, but when you go there, you feel like you're not understood. That's what I've heard from a lot of clients, a lot of people. It's like, oh, but if these people don't understand, like, you know, how do I explain to them how I was raised? How do I explain the community I came from?
Right.
And then, like Sadie was saying, individually, a lot of it is giving them that space to echo their thoughts, giving them that validation, because they've essentially lost footing, this grounding feeling, and, you know, helping them process. I think that's the biggest thing, because most people struggle with, like, what does this mean? Am I a bad person? Where am I going? How do I reconcile these two parts of myself? And so just walking them through. I think a lot of people, when they have these two identities, especially if they hold both of them, they tend to feel like they lose connections with loved ones. Right. Family is a big theme that comes up over and over. Everybody wants to talk about family. I feel like my family relationships are stressed. Do people still see me as family? Am I ruining my family? Right. And so therapy offers a place for unconditional positive art, as well as self-awareness and kind of finding out what you're going through. So
yeah, and to add, like, the last piece of that, you know, when you have the group, the relational component or the community component and the processing component, I think the last of it is really the empowerment component, which is to ask first, do you get a say in how you reconcile your background, your faith background, or your beliefs with who you are, what your sexual orientation is, what your gender identity is? And if you do get a say, what do you want that to look like? And I think a lot of people don't get asked that question because they think that they have to choose. It either has to be who I am or what I was raised to believe. And when you choose to walk away from what you were raised to believe, like Sobia said, you lose that community, you get ostracized. And that's really hard to deal with. And so empowering people to say, maybe you have a choice and you've maybe neglected to see that you have a choice in how you move forward and how you reconcile these things. And I think that's like a really powerful thing too, for those who are struggling with being queer and how their religion interprets that.
Exactly what Sadie's saying. I love that you said that, by the way, because so many of the narratives I've been getting recently from people from from faith-based backgrounds is like, I was outed, or something happened, or you know, people found out I was queer, or someone at school spread it, or whatever. Like, word got around the community, and then I had to leave that community for safety for my family, for reputation, for fill in the blank, whatever, right? For themselves or their family. And, or, you know, people tell me I can't be a queer Muslim. And like Sadie was saying, what if you ask them the question, why not? Like, who decides, right? And do you have the agency to decide for yourself? And then giving them that agency if they don't have it, helping them find that within themselves.
And I think that's what my next question is. For those that are from faith-based backgrounds, and you had mentioned that a lot of them, you know, some of them are religious, others are not. Do you have people who reconcile their faith and the fact that they are queer?
So I can speak a little bit to that, and I'm sure Sadie can add. So when we were creating this group, Queering Faith, at the center, one of the things that we worked together to do is we created a resource page for various different faiths. Like, we had sections for like Christians, people who were Catholic, people who were Jewish, people who were Muslim, so on and so forth, people who were Sikh, and there are pastors who are queer and Christian. There are communities where you have there's like Islamic gatherings where you talk about faith that are Muslim and queer. You have temples and synagogues that are accepting. I know people who are non-binary, you know, who present very strongly non-binary in a way that can't be written off as, you know, either gender, who are fully embraced and accepted and welcomed. So I think it is possible to have both. And I think there are spaces, I think sometimes we just need to dig a little bit to find them. But once you find one or two people, the networks are there.
Okay. Now, I would love to have a link to that resource. I would like to totally put in the show notes. The other thing I wanted to ask, so you do work with the youth, with those who are within the queer community. Do you also then reach back to their family. Because I think one of the biggest things that, happens is, yeah, you lose community, but you're losing immediate family too. Mother, father, brother, they all suddenly lose their mind over this. So do you, both of you, reach back to family as well to help them?
That's a great question. And I think there's like a huge caveat to that as well, because when I think, first off, I've never personally done that, right? I've never invited family to like a session to say, hey, how can we come around this person and bring support? The reason why I think there should be a lot of caution to that is who is the family and what is the harm that they contribute to this individual, right? Because the first thing you want to do as a therapist is protect your client from harm and from receiving those messages that have essentially led them to therapy because they need this help. So I would say when it comes to family, it depends. Is the family open? Is it that they're just confused, that they have questions? Maybe they haven't gone about it in the right way. Absolutely. There's like a lot of work that can be done with those kinds of families. And then you have families who it's just, you either abide by the rules that I have as a parent or you leave. And there's no wiggle room in that. And I would be skeptical to sort of invite those kinds of families into session because I wouldn't want to expose the individual to more internalized homophobia or, any additional harm. So that's a tricky one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, right, exactly what Sadie said. So you have to also consider confidentiality, right? Especially after the age of 16, it gets a little bit stricter. And, how and where, and if you need to break confidentiality is usually around, like, if you think there's an imminent threat of like self-harm or suicide, more than self-harm, suicide. And so some therapists do invite family into the room, but you have to be very careful. Like Sadie said, how you modulate that and you frame it. I've heard of clients who are, I've known clients who are youth and they've had family come in and it's become, the safe space of therapy has actually become a place of violence for them.
Oh, wow.
And so there are places where parents can go. The LGBTQ center where we work has this thing called the Trans Ally support group, where if you want to find support or education in your journey about a loved one who's transgender, non-binary, or gender expansive, they have that. So it's usually for friends, family, relatives, anybody who's kind of like, what does this mean, and trying to come to terms with it themselves as well, because that's not labor that the queer person should be doing, right? And so here are spaces for that.
And I would love a link to that as well, Sobia. I mean, again, it's all about understanding. And I think a lot of our fears exist from not understanding. And now I come to the weird question, okay? But it's a question that I have to ask because it is from where the lack of understanding comes from. Like, you look at me, cis heteronormative. If I came up to you and asked you, how do you know that so and so is gay? Or I mean, how does so and so know that they're gay? Or I mean, is it a phase? Or what do you mean non-binary? I mean, how does that work? That's what I want to ask the both of you.
Like, how does it work?
I hate to use the word work, but that's the word you're going to encounter. How does this work? I'm not getting any of this. You can pretend I'm a hillbilly, but
Are you asking, like, how does it work to be queer? Like, how do you
know you're queer? Okay. Like, I mean, I like men. Like, how come, like, whoever so-and-so doesn't like men, she likes women? How does that work?
That's a great question. I think because we both work with a lot of queer clientele, and by the way, if anybody is in California and wants services at the LGBTQ center, it's not only for queer clientele, it's open for everybody, and there's a sliding scale. So just putting that out there. But the stories vary from person to person. Some people, it's a slow realization, like something doesn't feel, I don't feel like everybody else. I'm not reacting like everybody else. I'm not having these same kinds of reactions like my friends are. For some people, it's clear, like they always know. for some people, they always know, like, in my case, I just didn't have a word for it. And then when I saw the word and I saw someone else describe their experience, I was like, that's mine. That's my experience too. Like, I can relate to that. And so I think it feels like being, it's the feeling
let me make it easier for you, Sobia. I know I threw a lot out there, but we're gonna go step by step, okay? One identity at a time. When somebody says they're gay, okay?
Yeah.
So how would you explain it to somebody who isn't gay? Like, how can you say that you're gay? I've never been gay. How can you say you're gay? I'm sorry, and I know, like, that's a terrible way to put it, but that's the reasoning that a lot of people come from. That, you know, it's not normal. I don't see it in movies. How can like, how does it exist? I don't understand.
I appreciate your commitment to this role of the person who is extremely ignorant.
Extremely ignorant.
You know, I think this is like a good example of like privilege, right?
Right.
Whether you're heterosexual or you're cis,
Right.
you carry a lot of privilege, and that privilege comes from the fact that you've never had to deal with not having language to describe what is going on inside you, not having a template in society for what could be, for who you're attracted to or who you feel that you are.
Right.
And so if I had to answer the question, like, well, how does it work to know? I would say it, and I hope this isn't like a cop-out answer, but
No.
I would almost hope in an ideal world, it wouldn't have to work a certain way, because there would be templates for people to see who I am attracted to, who I love is normal, right? And it is common because I see models of it everywhere. So then you wouldn't have people who are asking, how does it work? Because it's just who you are. And I think the reason why we use like language, like, oh, how does this work? How do you know? It's because we
my apologies, it's a terrible term, but it's
No.
Unfortunately where a lot of people come from. And I know this because I've encountered other people saying it that way, and I feel terrible inside because I have a lot of queer friends, and I know it hurts them that their identity is not it's like an object, it's like a fad that other people consider it to be, when it's not. It's a part of who they are.
Go ahead, Sobia.
No, when I hear you ask the question, I like Sadie, I want to like deconstruct the question almost in itself, and I'm trying hard not to, because that's where like my like desire to go is too. But I think in order to be ready to get an answer for the question, you have to be able to hold some empathy.
Right.
Because it feels just like being straight. Like, I mean, for a woman, for a cis woman to love a man feels straight. It's the same as like for a man who's gay to love another man. It feels the same, but you have to hold empathy in that like externally it looks different. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the same.
I think that's the answer I needed to hear for this, because other people don't understand the fact that it's all a matter of holding empathy for it. You don't have to follow the same it's like saying that if I encounter somebody who's gay, I'm not going to become gay. It's not how that works. It's not an external influence thing. It's a very internal. It's you exist with it. It's not something that is taught, or it's something that you pick up from TV. This is one of those objections that I hear from a lot of, especially parents that exist in the Muslim community. A lot of these younger kids shows that, I think one of them was Shira. She's a lesbian, has a lesbian relationship. And one of the parents I know was scandalized by this. They showed it on TV. I'm like, you've been seeing kissing in kids shows for a while now. It's just that it's been straight all this time. It doesn't, that's the thing. Most people don't understand that just because your child sees it on TV, it doesn't mean one way or the other. If they're gay, they're gay. If they're not, they're not.
So I'd like to address that misconception. I've heard that a lot too. I'm sure Sadie has as well. Like if we expose our children to the gays or the queer people or the lesbians or the trans community, they will become of that community. And that's not how it works. How it works is your child is who they are.
Right.
They're going to feel safe enough telling you.
Right.
And not internalizing it, and then having mental health issues like depression, or taking their life and you don't know why, or turning to substances in order to alleviate pain or have an exit strategy out of a life they don't feel safe in. So it's not about like these things are contagious somehow. It's just, do people feel safe enough to voice their who they are and who, you know, their views? And so it's about creating safety, which is important, right?
Right. And I mean, I think that's what I want people to understand as well. It's our own lack of understanding for a lot of these things. And as things come out, people also view these as fads. When I grew up in Pakistan, the transgender community has always been, historically, been a part of our culture. They have been like one of those taboo subcultures, but they've always existed. So for us, acceptance of especially trans women has a less of a barrier than for somebody who grew up probably in a different culture where they were not exposed to it. So if the not trans culture, but somebody who's trans is still something very new for somebody over here. That's why they view it with so much suspicion. And somebody who's also non-binary, I think it's one of those things that people are really grappling with it. But I think it's so wonderful the way you put it, is that if you really want to understand it, you have to have empathy for it. The other thing I wanted to ask, and it's again coming from places where, you know, people from faith-based background, even if you disagree with it, can you hold empathy for it? I know it's a loaded question, but I have to ask it. I had to ask it because that's what I'm here for.
You know, it's my opinion that you can.
Okay.
But here's the thing, and I can only really speak to Christianity because that's sort of what I'm more familiar with.
Right.
But in certain religions, you have this idea that in order that for you to empathize with something like being queer, it means that you are tolerating or accepting it or saying it is okay.
Right.
And so I think what you have is a lot of religious people who say, if I empathize, that means that this person will think it's okay. And apparently, God forbid that people accept themselves. That would be the worst thing to some religious people. Right. Not every religious person is like that. Obviously, there are a lot of religious people who have huge amounts of empathy for the queer community and are, you know, taking up both spaces. Right. But it is my opinion that you can. Of course, you can have empathy, like be religious and have empathy for the queer community, even be queer yourself. Right. But then you also have the other side of the spectrum in which people from religious backgrounds think that to empathize means to say it's okay. And that would mean doing something that isn't in line with their religious beliefs.
Right.
You know, it's interesting because I've been struggling with this as I've been coming out more with people in my family, in social circle, or they're like, well, and I think it's totally possible. I think it's okay for you to be like, this is not something I would do, or I feel comfortable with. Right. But, you know, you do you, and I love you, and I respect you. And you know, in terms of religious communities, I think about like religious communities interacting with each other, right? Right. If you're a Muslim and you're friends with a Christian person, essentially you are doing the same thing. Like I'm assuming to some degree, right? Like you believe that this person's views are different and not the same, and not views that you would have. Right. But you have the ability. Empathy requires some level of respect and dignity, and understanding that this person is human like I am, even though they have different views. It doesn't require you to take on their views. I think, just like Sadie said, that's the difference. Right.
And that's the thing. That's what I want people to really hear and understand. Again, coming face to face with now, and I mean, I hate to even put it that way, but there's a lot of this perception that, like it's the queer movement is just now, like it's spread everywhere, and it's going to take over, I don't know, like some like queer agenda. That's the queer agenda. That's one of those things that you hear so
Sure.
often. It's the queer agenda. Like, y'all are taking over the world. And I don't know, do what? Like rainbows everywhere. I don't know, man. But it's one of those things that people need to understand that, we interact with, especially now, globalized community, you interact with people, so many different kinds of people that you don't necessarily have common beliefs with, but you can really be a decent civilized human being with another person, even if you don't agree with them necessarily. So
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. That's why I needed the both of you to be here, because I think the work the both of you do is so great. It was a long time coming, because I've personally seen those who were part of the queer community struggling when I was growing up. I knew some of them, and now at least they have some visibility, and they know that, especially the internet is a blessing, because even if they are not ready to come out, they can find more resources for themselves, and they have people like you that they could come to, ask for advice, anything that they can get. So please, for everybody who's listening, I would love it if you could tell us where they can find the both of you. So where can they find you on Instagram, or where can they find you? Do you have a website?
Yeah, we have an Instagram where we promote mental health. It's the screen handle is Sadie and Sobia. That's SADIE, Sadie, and Sobia, SOB, like boy, IA, therapy, Sadie and Sobia therapy on Instagram.
I'll definitely putting that in the show notes, and the links that you have provided to really, the point of my gift of the gab is to really be able to have, and the difficult discussions that people are generally they're not sure how to have. And I know I put y'all in the spot more than once, but I think it's important that people hear this, that the way we are towards the queer community, it has to change, and the change comes from greater understanding. And I'm so glad that the both of you could help me contribute to some of that. I'm so very grateful. And thank you to everybody who's been listening in and watching this on YouTube. Thank you so much. And you guys take care of yourself, and may peace be on you all.